Dude, you were sighted in 5 minutes. Chad, that's a game changer. I think you should add a self-esteem button. Like you just push that button and the site says, you are so handsome. My stance on tech, it goes like this. Does the technology reduce animal suffering? Does it reduce hunter opportunity?
That handsome feature wouldn't be on your site. There's certain minimum requirements. Yeah, I'm taking notes.
Here we go, folks. Welcome to the Gritty Podcast. I have my friend Chad Van Camp with me today from Garmin. Chad, what do you have to say for yourself?
Hey, thanks for having me back. People are probably tired of hearing from me, but when you called to ask if I would do another podcast, I saw Siri, my assistant, told me that Gritty was calling. I fully expected that it was going to be the Philadelphia Flyers new mascot with almost twice the followers that you have on IG, dude.
Okay.
What's up with that?
And that mascot is lame. There's nothing gritty about that mascot. What the heck? It's embarrassing.
I don't know.
It's like they hijacked Gritty and sort of softened it or something. I don't know. I'm ashamed. I'm just not into Instagram that much. There was a time when I enjoyed it. Now, I can't really say I'm a big fan.
You're going dark, huh?
Yeah, I'm less motivated to participate in social media than ever before, but I'll probably change my mind in a week.
Yeah, I imagine.
So, Chad, I just got back from Kodiak Island, hunting Sitka blacktail there, and I got to use the Garmin Zero, and I used the Garmin Zero in every state that it was legal. I used the Garmin Zero in Ohio for whitetail. I used it in New Zealand. I used it on my bear hunt in BC. Pretty much, I was probably one of the earliest adopters, and I played with the earliest versions that had lots of problems and glitches and stuff, down to the version I have now, which seems to be completely flawless. So I think that there's a lot of misconception around the Garmin Zero and the site. It's very controversial. I posted a little bit about it the other day. My friend Ryan Carter, posted on Instagram a little post about his Garmin Zero and how, in his words, I'll just read it. Ryan said, basically, he gets a lot of DMs about it. Here's my 2 cents. Hands down, one of my top purchases in 2018. And just so people know, I am not financially supported by Garmin in any way. So,
hey, if I could interrupt there, I was going to mention that I took some notes from the last podcast we did, just so I wouldn't state things over. And pretty much we ended that podcast with you saying to me, since I'm not sponsored by Garmin, I can chuck this thing if I don't like it.
And
so that stuck with me.
And that's the truth. And people seem to think I'm paid, and therefore that's the only reason I would promote it or talk about it. It's like, no. When I talk about products and I talk about gear, it's because I genuinely like the products. And I do have partners. Sitka, Leupold, Yeti, Mountain Ops are partners of mine. Those partners support what I do, but I also am a huge fan of their products and use them anyway. But Garmin is not a partner. I just value the products. I value what you've got. And that Garmin Zero, I've been able to use. And so back to Ryan Carter's comment, he said, one of my top purchases in 2018, serious. Here's my honest thoughts. First calibration was a pain. I was so frustrated I about took it back to the store. Once calibrated and in the field, however, I have not looked back. I have no issues with this bow sight. Rain, cold in Utah, fog, rain in Ohio, freezing temps in Illinois, and a Cincinnati airport that demolished my bow case. The site saw most elements and performed flawlessly. Biggest drawbacks, the cost, initial setup, and the fact that there are a few Western states that have not jumped on board. Promise, this site is a game changer. I reposted it. Ryan, ironically, got lots of positive feedback on his post. I reposted it, and I got a lot of negative feedback on the same post. I think that there's a misconception. A lot of people bring up the fact that the Garmin Zero makes you take a shortcut to archery hunting, or it makes archery hunting too easy. From my perspective, technology, when it comes to technology being used in hunting, because we all use OnX Maps, we use Google Earth, we use we'll use spotters. Modern optics are phenomenal. I would argue that you take away a man's spotter and binoculars, he kills way less animals. Give him the Zero, take away those other things, he's screwed. So
yeah. Or game cameras, right?
Game cameras are another example that, and so I feel like there's a lot of technology that radios, for example. You have guys that use radios a lot and guys who absolutely find it abhorrent to use a radio. Like it's the crime against hunting. While at the same time, they walk out with a rifle and shoot 400 yards. And it's like, when you're talking fair chase, I get a little tired of this whole argument. And technology being this boogeyman that people talk about, it's going to ruin hunting. My idea is, I thought about this quite a bit. There's a few things I care about when it comes to hunting and technology. I care about lethality, efficiency, respecting the animal, quick, clean, efficient kills. I care about those things. I also care about the challenge and hunter opportunity. I care about both. And sometimes, right, like the greater the challenge, often in a hunt, the more primitive, let's say, your weapon becomes, the harder it is to have that quick, clean, and efficient kill. And we can get into that debate all day long, and I've had it many times, and I don't care to have it here. My stance on tech, it goes like this. Does the technology reduce animal suffering? If the answer is yes, we should absolutely look at this as something that we employ. I feel like lighted nocks are a no-brainer. Do they reduce animal suffering? Absolutely, they can. They can help you see where your arrow hit. They can help you know whether you should give the animal time. It can help you see where the animal goes in low light if the arrow didn't pass through. There's lots of benefits to having a lighted nock. You can get a follow-up shot on an animal and put it out of its misery if it's suffering, where you think you hit a double lung shot and you go and bump it because you're not, you hit it in the wrong spot, and it just really helps. I just see all benefits there. Does the tech reduce animal suffering? If the answer is yes, the next question is does it cause any undue negative stress to or negative impact on the environment or on the ecology, on animals in general? And if the answer is no, like, I don't think we should be fishing with dynamite. It might be an efficient killing way,
but it's not. But that's not.
But it's not good for the environment, right?
Or yeah.
And so I don't think dynamite's a great option. And thirdly, I think, does it reduce hunter opportunity? Meaning, does the technology make you so successful that harvest rates go up and they cause hunter opportunity to go down? Because here's the deal, Chad. When it comes to the Garmin Zero, if you're going to tell me that I can pretty much draw a tag every year if I don't use the Zero, but if I use the Zero and everybody starts using the Zero, I can only draw the tag every other year or every third year, I'd be like, I don't want the Zero.
Yeah.
I want my opportunity. I want to still be able to hunt. I don't want you to decrease hunter opportunity. I feel like we need to safeguard hunter opportunity. That means don't introduce technology into like an archery only season if it's going to reduce people's opportunity to get out at existing levels, right? A good example of that is Kodiak Island. I just got back from Kodiak Island. I was hunting there with Cole Kramer. We were hunting for Sitka blacktail. And Kodiak or Alaska in general has archery only seasons. And there's certain rules in an archery only season that you must follow. The Garmin Zero, as far as I could tell, isn't really legal in an archery only season. There's a few things that aren't legal in an archery only season. But when you're talking about a general season, like Sitka blacktail, you can go out and hunt them with a rifle or a bow. It's like when it wasn't an archery only season, you could use a Garmin Zero. We called and checked and verified with some fish and game guys because it doesn't cast any forward light. And so it didn't break any major rules there. The same rules that apply to a gun you can use a lighted reticle, right? And that's pretty much what it is on the Zero. And so it translates to the bow. So you can use the Garmin Zero on the Sitka blacktail hunt. And I love that. I love that because if that tech does increase hunter opportunity in an archery only season, thereby reducing or increase success rates, thereby reducing hunter opportunity, I'd really consider asking or promoting the Zero be used in a different season. Throw it in a muzzleloader season or into another general season. Like in Montana, I can hunt with any weapon. During rifle season, I can use a bow if I want. Let the Zero be used then. But in an archery only season, yeah, to yank it out. But here's my deal. I don't think the Zero is some magic bullet that all of a sudden increased harvest rates. And
no, I mean, it took a bad, not bad, but some people have said that about it, and as well as I and anybody who's bought one and set one up, you quickly come to realize these are my pins, this is my practice, this is my archery form. It's literally just a combination of a rangefinder to give you the exact pin. And what's interesting, I had a guy ask me the other day, has your shooting improved, with the Zero, and absolutely, but it's not just a matter of my shooting has improved at 26 yards or 37 yards. People typically go to the range and they'll shoot 20, 30, 40, 50 or whatever. We don't shoot a lot of those in between ranges. And if we do practice that with a fixed pin, we'll probably allow ourselves to shoot a little bit larger group, right? Because we're gapping. And we say, well, that's okay, I was gapping. But at the same time, your groups can be accurate at any range you want them to be accurate at.
Well, and if you're John Dudley and you have like a 36-inch draw and an 80-pound bow or whatever, just if you're a big dude, your bow shoots pretty flat. You give a bow to my wife at 45 pounds with a much lighter arrow that's not as devastating. Like I shoot a 505 grain arrow. She's shooting a really light arrow, and her bow and her arch is still like pretty dramatic. If she's off by 1 or 2 yards, she's missing an entire animal at 40, 50 yards. Whereas me, it's like I'm off by 5 yards. I guess wrong by 7 yards. I'm still in the kill zone. And so the Zero, I think, can be a game changer for especially those that have a much lower poundage, a much lower, draw weight, a lot shorter draw length, especially for those who want to still have a heavy arrow, but are confronted with all of those obstacles in terms of draw length and draw weight. And so I feel like having that sight makes those type of people far more lethal than they would be otherwise in terms of having that precise shot. Because you're off by 1 or 2 yards because you pin gap best you can, in that scenario, especially for women and kids. I just feel like, man, they can be really good shots, but if you're forcing them to guess and pin gap, they're only going to be so accurate with that. And I feel like any increase in harvest rate that can be obtained with the Garmin Zero, I think will be offset by the reduction in wound rates. I think it's a net even proposition. Like, I want to use the Zero because it makes me more efficient. I have no doubt that yes, I think I'm going to tag out either way with the Zero or something else. But I think that I'm going to tag out faster with a Zero and more effectively. Meaning, I might miss or I might even wound something with my traditional sight and, hit it low or hit it high or something. And then with the Zero, though, I feel like you get that one opportunity and it's precise, And I think a lot of guys, every hunt I'm on, and you have two camps. You have a guy who hit something and he did the best he could, tried the best he could, and he hit too high or too low. The animal runs off. They track it for miles and miles and miles. And then it comes down to this question: was it a fatal shot or not? And the reality is, except for some states like Alaska's this way, if you wound an animal, you draw blood, your hunt's over. You're supposed to walk away. In most of the states, if you don't find the animal, you don't have to punch your tag. That's
provided you did your due diligence, right, to grid search and track, and you can demonstrate that you gave it an honest effort to avoid wanton waste, right?
Right. So how many guys hit something and they don't find it, and so they keep hunting and they hit something else, killing 2 animals in one season? I think it happens a lot. That's where I feel like that Xero can be a game changer for that. But at the end of the day, you still have to make the shot. You still have to find the animal. You still have to get in bow range. You still have to do all the things you normally would. It just saves you those few seconds that a guy uses to range and dial. And those seconds can be precious and they can make the difference. People still do that. They range and they dial, or they range and they pin gap. That's common practice. You're just shortening that time frame, which will give you more opportunities. But like I said, I think will also decrease the amount of wounded animals you come across. So, for example,
like when you're to touch on that though a little bit, like confidence is another thing that the sight gives you. That you ever, when you're in the zone and when you're out there, shooting some arrows and things just feel good. You got the right pin. You just group better because you have that confidence. And that helps make a better shot as well. And that's not something I'm going to say is solely what the Xero provides, but it does offer, the ability to know that you're going to have the right pin for that opportunity when it presents itself.
Well, I think it's also more critical on smaller game. So Casey Harbertson has been using the site, and it's like I'm going to Arizona to hunt javelina and coos deer.
Is he going with you, or are you going solo?
I'm going to go with Randy Newberg. We're going for coos deer, javelina, and antelope jackrabbits, which are bigger than the javelina. They're big old rabbits, but they're still a small target, and coatimundi. So we have the whole gamut, right? And a lot of that it's all small game. The cool thing about a coos deer is after you kill it, you can just put it in your pocket. So they're tiny.
And keep hunting.
Yeah. So when it comes to a kill zone the size of a grapefruit, or a cantaloupe or an antelope or something like that, a melon, or even smaller, a baseball, single yard accuracy makes a huge difference at 41, 42 yards, 33 yards when it's a small target. And so it's going to make small game hunting really fun with a bow, because you can get so precise that if you're a good shot, you can hit exactly where you're aiming, like quarter size, golf ball size hits, with accuracy. And so I think it's going to be great for that. And often on the coos deer hunt last year, there were a lot of opportunities that, because I refused to shoot without some single pin, without knowing the yardage, because the coos deer, the first buck I came on, I swear it came up to just above my knee. It's back. It was a tiny little thing. And realizing that, I thought he was 80, 87, 85, 90 yards away, and we range him and he's 50. I was like, oh
wow,
whoa, that's so much closer, but it's just such a small animal. Then when I got to within 20 and 30 yards of a few, I realized, how tiny they are. But being able to come to full draw and range at full draw on a hunt like that, with these deer that are switched on, really switched on. There were a number of times when I was able to range, come to full draw, but before I could shoot, the deer, trotted 5 yards to my left or 20 yards. And now I don't know if he's 5 yards further or 3 yards further. And that makes a difference when I'm shooting 40 beyond, So it's going to be fun to use the sight in that particular circumstance on that type of hunt. This year, I used it on my bear hunt in BC and shot a great bear, and that was awesome. Again, you see on the film, I come to full draw, I range that bear. I have to let down a few times. I move closer. He moves away. I don't have anybody over my shoulder calling ranges. I'm not messing around with a range finder. I'm just focused on the hunt. I get to full draw on the bear. He gives me the angle I need. I'm ranging him. I got the exact pin, and I center punched him perfectly at 45 yards or something. It was great. And then on my hunt in Ohio with Big Sexy. And
yeah, tell me a little bit about that, because we haven't really talked much about that hunt, and I don't think it was a long shot, right? But I think you spent what 5 days up in the tree, and I followed on IG, and I saw the ice storm, and I listened to the other podcast about like the trees crashing down, and it was funny. It was awesome listening to you describe. You had planned this escape route, right?
Oh, dude!
You was like, I can get out of this thing in 2 seconds if I have to.
I had it all dialed, man. I could drop to the ground. I could rappel out of there in an emergency. I'd be out of there, but I'd be going down fast. It would be like fire pole, but faster.
But you invested that much time and effort, and when it came to the actual taking of the shot, I think was it like 18 yards or something like that?
I think it was 16 yards.
16, which is a slightly different pin than a 20-yard pin. It's going to be just a touch higher.
Yeah, so let me speak on that, because the reality is it's way different than a 20-yard pin. It's much different. At those angles, it's really tricky too to judge distance. So for people who didn't listen to that podcast or don't know the story there, I was maybe 20 feet off the ground in that tree stand when I threw out some milkweed, and watched my scent drift down behind me. It would hit the ground, somewhere at like 40 yards or 30 yards beyond me. And deer kept circling or and the wind would switch left, right, north, south, west. It would just go different directions. I kept getting busted by deer, especially the older deer. They just kept smelling me and they'd leave. So, I went back in there, and of course, I like to be up high in a tree. Not afraid of heights. I like being up there. I'd rather be super high and have deer not know I'm there and not detect me and smell me and take a tricky shot. And with the Garmin Zero, I'm doubly confident with that. We practice out here in the West at the Total Archery Challenge and on other hunts. We practice super steep angled shots. So I'm okay with that. I'm at home there. I feel confident in executing that shot. I made some pretty tough steep angle shots throughout my life. So when I got in that tree, I raised that tree stand up pretty high and 40 feet or something. And so when I got up there and I dropped the milkweed, that it would drift down, and it really didn't hit the ground and get to ground level for about 80 to 100 yards. So it just took that much longer for my scent to like drop, And so anything directly under me seemed to not wind me if it was within 100 yards of me. Now, the wind would switch and thermals would switch, and sometimes it would suck down faster, but in general, it didn't hit the ground. My wind didn't seem to be detectable. It just floated over their heads out to a certain range. And this buck came in, and tried to scent me downwind like he'd done probably earlier in the week. I just never saw it because he was in the tree line. And anyway, he didn't smell me, even though he tried. And then he came under me, and it was a very, very steep angled shot. I didn't have time. If I had a rangefinder and I had to range and find out, I know he's 20 yards, but is he 10 yards? Like I know I'm using a 20-yard pin is what I'm saying, but is he 10 yards or is he 16 yards or is he 20 yards? And would I hit him if I use my 20-yard pin regardless? Probably. Would I hit him perfectly? Probably not. Maybe too high, maybe too low, maybe one lung, maybe the bottom of the onside lung, maybe the back of the offside. Like, it depends on the angle. I want it to be exact. And so
right.
But
there's two variables there, right? It's not only the matter of the 16-yard pin is the pin where your arrow is going to hit if your form is true. But then with that steep angle, you've also got to figure out where to put that arrow, right? And the Zero doesn't do that for you. That's hunter, skill and experience.
Well, and I've shot the Valkyrie arrows all year, and that broadhead and that arrow is, they're Black Eagle X impacts. And Brent Hahn assembles them using his Valkyrie system. And, dude, I've been able to I can't believe anything I've shot has passed through it seems like there's nothing that slows it down, So I've yet to put it through a big moose or a big bull elk, but so far what I've seen with it is, breaking both bones in a bear, going through its shoulders, going through, my mule deer in Montana, blowing out the offside leg into bits.
That's at 90. That was like at 90 some yards, right?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And that's a long ways away to still have that kind of kinetic energy. When we talk about the site being a game changer, I remember when I was, out there visiting you for TAC, and I got to touch and hold those Valkyrie broadheads in my hand. Like, I was scared to handle them. They're that sharp. And to me, those are game changer as well, right? It doesn't necessarily mean just technology. It's anything that kind of revolutionizes how, lethalness or others.
Well, it's funny. I mean, there's going to be people who still don't buy into it or feel like it's too expensive, and that's fine. I look at some of the films, like I've watched Born and Raised, Land of the Free 2.0,
Mm-hmm.
Been enjoying that, watching a ton of it. And I've seen shots that people hit in a shoulder blade and where the arrow snapped off or the broadhead got stuck. And I see people passing up on shots because they're like, I don't like this quartering to me shot, or I don't like this angle and stuff like that. And I'm like, I have zero doubts. And after talking to everyone that's used these heads, my broadhead, my arrow system would just go through it. Period.
Right.
I don't need to worry about what they're worrying about, waiting for the animal to turn. And to me, and we can talk about ethics all day long. Don't tell me it's an unethical shot angle if it goes through the body and all the way out the other side and kills the animal in 4 seconds. Like, to me, it's kind of a shame the current arrows and broadhead systems that have been on the market for so long. It's like, why hasn't this kind of system been developed? Why are we, with today's modern bows, why don't we have a modern arrow that complements it well?
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, that's my opinion. I like the broadheads, all the broadheads I've shot through animals, blown up bones with, and gone through. All those arrows come out looking like, and the broadhead, like it's never been used. And you're talking about blowing up bones on mule deer and bears that are femurs, like the biggest bones in their front legs and shoulders, and just snapping them into bits. And then the broadhead comes through like nothing happened. I look at other people's broadheads that hit those things. They're trash. Those broadheads are donezo. They can't use those anymore. I think
most people probably consider, at least, I can't speak for everybody. For myself personally, it's a one and done type of thing. Like, after I shoot it once, I would probably not use it again in a hunting situation. It just goes in as the practice head or whatever.
Yep. And
but for you use yours as practice heads, then you go hunt with them, right?
Yeah, I use them for practice heads. I shoot them into the targets, and I sharpen them up, and they're good to go. And I know that exact arrow is flying well because I just shot it earlier. Not only that, when I go out and I shoot an animal with it, I put it back in the quiver and zip it up a little bit with sharp. It's ready to go again. Like, I have not broken an arrow that's gone through an animal yet. They've all gone through, and then they're absolutely fine. And so, unless you lose the arrow, there's no problem. Arrow so far has been, and that's what Brent says is the case. And granted, I've killed 3 animals with the Valkyrie arrows, and so far they've surpassed any other arrow system I've ever used or combo by a landslide. So, not to say other systems don't work. I'm just saying I think they do. I just know for a fact that this system is next level for anything I've ever tried, and it pisses some people off. But
that confidence is important, though. It affects how you shoot.
Well,
if you go out there expecting to win the game, there's a much higher likelihood you're going to win. If you go out expecting to lose or to have, an issue or to have that you can't overcome, it gets in your head. It's a mental thing.
Well, when that buck comes out, big sexy, and he comes out underneath me, they're so switched on, and I've been pinned in that tree so many times, by other deer. I was just being very cautious and careful, and he stops underneath me and he looks around. He kind of looks up a little, just not high enough. and he just scans all the trees and he looks around, and then he's like, and I think the reason he did that was because he smelled something up in a tree before. It's crazy how these whitetail can smell and then they can pinpoint where the smell came from. It's like they understand wind patterns. They understand that scent somehow came from above rather than across. I don't know that we understand how animals smell. I don't think we even can remotely grasp how they do it. But
that's anyway, what we say in the Midwest is the difference between a young buck and an older buck is that old bucks know to look up.
Yeah. And so he certainly, I think maybe earlier in the week or at some point, maybe there's a lot of thick cover behind me. Maybe he pinpointed that tree and me in that tree a few days earlier or whatever. I don't know. But anyway, when he comes out, he finally turns and he's kind of walking away from me. And I draw as soon as his head turns, and I start ranging him with the Xero. Instantly, I get my yardage, I get my pin, I take my finger off, it drops. It says 16 yards, and it's doing angle compensation, right? It's telling me exactly what the angle is.
Yep. And that's the big number in the middle is the comp distance. Yep.
So it drops and gives me that 16-yard pin. Line of sight, I want to say, I don't, probably these angles better than I do, but at 40 something feet in the air at 16 yards, horizontally, I think line of sight.
Well, if you were 45 feet up the tree and that's 15 yards, right? And then if the target's 15 yards away, you'd be a 45 degree angle. That's an extremely steep angle to shoot at. So you're cut when, you're probably cutting 3 or 4 yards off of that. Just thinking off the top of my head, but
yeah. So it's definitely tricky. And, another show I really enjoy and I've been watching and catching is, The Hunting Public on YouTube, watching those guys hunt. In one of the earlier episodes, they had a buck at like 16 yards, roughly similar shot to mine, maybe 12 or something. He's at full draw and he aims and he shoots and he just hits it low on the bottom, and it comes out low, and it's a steep angle, and maybe he had the pin just right, but he just didn't aim, because those angles switch on you where he needed to, compensated too much, whatever. And then it took a while to find it, and it had gone quite a long ways. And in that kind of country, they lost the blood trail, and there were copperhead snakes they had to kind of like work around, and it was not fun. And there's a lot of stress on whether they were going to find it or not. It was super hot, and they were worried that the meat was going to spoil and the deer was going to rot. And there's all these challenges. And, contrast that to Big Sexy as he walks out. I'm at full draw. I have a 16-yard pin. I know exactly that dot. And just because I've hunted a lot from a tree stand, I've shot a lot of blacktails from a tree stand. I've shot a lot of total archery challenge at steep angles off of cliffs and so on. When I'm aiming at an animal, I'm aiming at its exit. Like, it's just automatic for me now. I've practiced, I used to have a couple of tree stands at home in Oregon that were super high off the ground. And I put those deer targets on the ground. And at first, when I first started doing it, I realized I aimed in the wrong spots because I was looking at where I wanted to hit instead of where I wanted it to exit. And so it doesn't matter where the arrow enters. It really matters where it leaves the animal.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's automatic for me now. When I come to full draw, I look at where I want that arrow to end up on the backside of the animal. And I don't know. That's just me. And so on Big Sexy, as soon as I was like, Mah, I had to stop him because he was 1 foot away from going into the bushes, right? If I had to range, calibrate, like get in my head, kind of go, okay, make sure you aim low. I didn't have time for any of that. It just wouldn't have happened, or I would have had to risk coming to draw, or I didn't know where he was going to pop out underneath me, right? Like without the Xero, I would have been taking a much more, I'd be using my 20-yard pin. I'd be trying to aim probably low to compensate for 16 versus 20 yards. And and I would be, kind of not as confident in where that exit and where the pin should be relative to the exit hole. I'd find the exit hole, and then I'd kind of alter. And with the Zero, I just put that dot exactly where I wanted it to exit. And I didn't care about which way the body's facing. I didn't care about where it was going to go in at. This is where I wanted to leave the body. And I took the shot, and it went coast to coast. Literally, it goes in like behind the hip on the right side, goes through the internals, through the diaphragm, like liver, lungs, and it just missed the heart and came out the left side of the front of the chest. That deer turned and ran 3 seconds and fell down and died. First of all, being able to just put the arrow anywhere you need it to go and know it's going to go all the way through the body. The stomach, the grass, like that stuff doesn't slow it down. It's just like, it's unreal. But as it goes through and it pops out the other side, it was nice to have a clean, quick, and efficient kill. And I think that's the difference, because I think I would have killed that buck with my other shot placement with a 20 and whatever. I think I still would hit him, but I think it wouldn't be as quick and efficient. And I think that's the case most of the time is, we hit the animals with our bows. It's just not precise.
Right. Yeah. And you put that much effort and time. I mean, you guys sat, all day, right? Dawn to dusk? Or
me and Casey both. And
you had that ice storm there too, right? And I remember seeing the post from Casey on Instagram about the bow was all iced up and the sight was all iced up, and it was still working, Well, and I get a lot of questions on is it durable? What does it do in the rain and the fog and the snow? And what are your thoughts?
That's been a concern for a lot of people is, how does it do in the rain? How does it do in the snow? How does it do in the fog, on all that? And this sight isn't a magic bullet, right? Mm-hmm. Like people think because you have it on there, all of a sudden now you're going to make shots you'd never make before. And it's like, no, typically whenever possible, I range and I'll dial if I have a dial, or I'll pin gap, right? That's still all the same stuff. And I was talking to Adam Foss, he's like, my brother's over my shoulder, the rangefinder, and he's like 20, 35. It's the ram on the left, the far left, and he's got a buddy right next to him doing all that stuff, because that's a game changer. Having a guy over your shoulder ranging every second and telling you the ranges. Cole's right there. He's the guide. He's like, deer's 30. He's 45. He's 42. Deer's 47. Like, their job is to range so that the bow hunter doesn't have to mess with that. Well, with the Zero, you don't need that. You're the guy that has it all built into one. Here's the deal. If you have trouble getting a range with a handheld rangefinder, it's no different with the Garmin. If there's a ton of fog or rain and your rangefinder's not getting a range, the Garmin is a rangefinder too. It has the same problem. So you hit the same obstacle. And we ran into that on Kodiak, because you'd have this tall grass, especially down by the river and down in these lower cut valleys. And the deer would stand up in the grass and their entire body would be blocked, or most of it blocked by grass, or you'd have these single grass strands popping up and it would roll. And so you couldn't tell if you were ranging the deer or if you were ranging some grass in front of it or some grass behind it. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Normally you can hit an object and go, oh, it says 40 yards, and you hit the ground behind it and it says 90 yards. And you're like, you're on your subject, Here it's like you're getting 41, 42, 43, 44, 33, 37, 38, you're getting everything, because it's this flat expanse of stuff you're ranging. And so that was the same problem with the handheld rangefinder. There's no difference. So what I try to do in that situation, in most situations, I try to range the head, because it's clearly above and beyond Same thing with the moose in BC. If I can range the head of the animal, then I know I am, when it's in a patch of alders, I know I'm getting the right range. I did my best, but it's the same challenge in fog or rain that you run into. But with the simple switch of like at full draw, just tap your riser, and boom, you have fixed pins. And you're in the same boat you'd be if you didn't have, a rangefinder on the bow. Same thing.
Yeah.
So it's
it's got that manual feature too, right? Yes. I think I talked about it last time, but I'll just restate it. You push and hold. So quick taps of left or right change the brightness on the fly if you don't like what the ambient light sensor is adjusting for you. But if you press and hold, it takes you into the manual pin mode, and we've actually I'll talk about it in a little bit, but now it used to be you had to like tap a bunch of times once you got into that mode. Now you can just press and hold. It'll like slide through the numbers for you. So you could have, in that situation, basically dialed up a 45-yard pin and then, used a handheld or used coal to like tell you what it's at. And if you felt good about it, that you could get through the grass and such, go ahead and take a new range. Or you've got a 45-yard pin. If you tap the trigger button, you go back to fixed pins. You tap the trigger button again, you go back to that manually dialed 45. Like, it's literally like 3 sights in one, auto ranging, single and fixed. So.
Yeah. And so it's versatile. It's easy. And I just think guys have this preconceived notion that it's somehow magical. It's like, no, it has the same, you still have to range. You run into the same problems with a rangefinder. But I will say that it seems to penetrate the rain, penetrate the fog, and work more effectively than a lot of the handheld rangefinders do. Yep. So as far as its rangefinding capability, it's top notch. Now, freezing ice, cold, rain, like all that stuff, sometimes my lens, because there's a lens there that you're looking through, sometimes it collects a little bit of fog in extreme fog conditions like New Zealand, but not enough fog to prevent me from making an accurate shot. Same with the rain. Sometimes I get rain and it'd be dripping down the lens, but not at any rate that would impede my shot capability. And
yeah, we tested that. We have an anti-fingerprint coating on it. We don't have anti-fog, and we've tested, like I think it's called like cat crap, or there's some stuff called scope dope, and those types of things. You can apply those to the lens, and it does fine. Like, it doesn't hurt the reflectance or anything like that of the pins, but it will help kind of bead that stuff up if you're in those situations. We kind of just leave that up to the individual how they want to run it.
Well, and then a couple of times I got a little bit of a halo effect when I got water somewhere in there where it reflected. I don't know, where it sends a signal to the light. Again, it didn't impede me from being able to make a shot. It's not that it wasn't the cleanest sight picture like I'd like to have, but I would gladly accept that sight picture and have the capabilities it has, right? Like, then I would, not have that option. And like I said, it's never really been a problem to the point where I can't take a shot. The only time where it's been sort of like, whoa, is when it was wet and I had the sun like hitting it just right. And then I was like having a hard time seeing what I needed to see. So one of the things that
your tree stand was too close to the sun, man.
Yeah. Well, it was really when I was in New Zealand hunting tar with it.
Gotcha.
And I'd say the most challenging conditions I've used it in were actually New Zealand. And it was the fog. New Zealand's fog is incredible. Like, it's next level fog. And then the drizzle and the rain just sort of like, just like a wall of it. And so that was far more challenging than ice and heavy rain and stuff like that. So, but I have a lens cloth just like I do with my binos. I have 2 or 3. I have some in my rain jacket pocket. I got some in other pockets, and basically I pull out that lens cloth and I wipe down my sight every so often, and it's clear. It's a small price to pay for having the abilities that I have. So with it, and then I used it, on Kodiak. I've drug it through bushes. I've dropped it. I've banged it up and done all that stuff to it. And it's held up just fine. I mean, durability wise, I'm not worried about it. People are worried about it running out of batteries, and I've changed the batteries in it once. It seems to never die. So I don't really care about, like, it's like people say, well, I'm worried about running out of battery. I'm like, does your rangefinder ever run out of batteries? Like, are you paranoid about your rangefinder like that? Because I don't sit there and go, oh no, my rangefinder might run out of batteries, so I'm not going to use one. It's like, that's silly. Like, it's the same thing with the site. It's designed the same way. I can do 1 billion ranges with it, and it never runs out of battery. So that's really a non-issue.
Yeah, I should probably correct you. It's not 1 billion ranges. It's so yeah, if I can, it's 25,000 ranges. And granted, depending on how long you squeeze the trigger on a target, like you're ranging, but 25,000 ranges is, quite a few. It's a season. Like, I haven't replaced batteries on mine, and I've been shooting them for 2 years now. But
so here's my take on that. I bring my batteries. I bring spare AAAs with me anyway, and they're basic AAA lithium batteries that it runs on. They seem to be impervious to the cold. They don't seem to die in the cold like some other batteries, like my Sony camera batteries that just die. So when I use that though, once I have 1 bar drop away, in my battery meter, I'll use it a while longer, and then I just replace them. And I take those and put them in my headlamp, and I put new ones in my Garmin. And that's like once every 6 weeks or so of continuous use. And I do that just to make sure I'm always fully loaded with power. And it's probably way overkill, but I don't ever want to be in a situation where battery's low or the batteries just don't work, So
what I would say to that is, I mean, how you do it's fine, but like we have a warning mechanism in there, so we will tell you if the battery's getting down to where it's too low to range, because ranging is what draws all the power out of the batteries. The pins and the display, they draw so little current that essentially if it turns on at the truck or at camp when you leave for the day, if for whatever reason your batteries got too low to range, you'd still have all the other functionality of the site left.
Yeah.
You'd have the display, you'd have the pins. They just sit power. So worst case is if you keep a spare, set of a couple lithiums and you need those for a cold weather performance, you're going to get your hunt in that day, and then you just swap them out that night. But it would tell you, like, hey, I'm getting down low. You might want to replace me because I'm not going to be able to range pretty soon.
So there's two, like, for me, there's two, perhaps 3 design flaws that annoy the crap out of me.
I knew these were coming.
And so
send it.
So one of the things that annoys me about the site is on the battery issue is, so when I first got it, it would freeze up sometimes. The Zero would freeze up, right? You guys were working through, it was still like a prototype. You're still working through lots of issues, finishing the product. And so it would freeze up, and the only way I could get it to reboot or start over was to remove the batteries and put them back in, right?
Yep.
So there's no like hard kill switch anywhere on it, right? And then the battery compartment isn't like your Rhino or something awesome where you just like turn a clip and it pops off and then you replace it. Instead, it's got these lame freaking like screw in Allen key bolts that I'm just like, are you kidding me? I have to have a tool with me to open the battery door. Like, it annoys the crap out of me. So,
right.
So that's the one thing. And I'll say, as far as it locking up, I only had it lock up once in the last 6 months. Don't know why. It just froze one time. And so I always bring my Allen key with me, so the only way I can get it to stop is to pull the batteries out. And again, That's a small price to pay for me to have the functionality that I have. Now, could it cost me an animal in that critical moment? Well, when it works 99.9% of the time, I'm not worried about that. It's like my iPhone. now and then it just will lock up. Don't know why, but it won't keep me from using one. But it would be nice to have either quick kill switch or at least a better way of a quick like adjustment of the battery and back together.
Yeah. Now, it's not acceptable to me or Garmin to have those lockups. So we talked about this last time. Like, yeah, hindsight's 2020. I wish I would have put that in there, but that's still just a Band-Aid. Like, lockups to me are not acceptable. So when this podcast comes out, we will put 3.20 software out for everybody to go get, and that fixes every reported lockup we've ever gotten from any customer who's ever called us. It's one of those things where everybody's site, people run them all differently, and they're all made the same. But at the same time, there could be this hidden bug that your site never had that somebody else's did. So even though you haven't experienced a particular issue, it could be laying there under the surface, and we've addressed all of those. And what I would say is we really appreciate the customers that take the time to call us and say, hey, this happened, because it helps us make a better product, and we appreciate that they do that. So
well, and like I said,
I have gray hairs from putting this site, knowing it goes on bows. Like, I didn't have any until this year. So,
yeah, well, that's what I was saying. I've had to do that one time in like 6 months of hard daily use all the time and in harsh conditions. And it just so happened when it did it, I was just practicing shooting some shots, and I was like, oh, it froze. And I just backed it out and switched it. That could really suck for a guy if it happens at the wrong time. But like I said, it just seems like every time you guys put out a new update, it just comes with more flawless performance, and like Ryan Carter's never had that happen to him. Casey hasn't had that. And so everybody, I am really thrilled about that. But, that's the thing. Switching out the batteries in the field, it's a game changer if you don't have to have a tool to do it.
Yeah. We got to make that better in the future.
So the only other thing that annoys the crap out of me is the initial setup is a pain in the rear. If you had micro adjustment titanium rail for that thing, it would be a game changer, because you just need to micro adjust that little sphere that controls the reticle. When you have to like use that rail that's a hunk of junk, and you unbolt it and you tap, you just have to move it like a micro hair to get it just right. And if you go past it, you're screwed. You got to start over again. And that, I think, is a real struggle for a lot of people. Is now that I've messed around with it as much as I have, I've set them up for Casey, Jordan, myself. The guys down at Wild Arrow are pros. They can set it up for you in a matter of minutes. But having a micro adjust rail on that is a game changer.
Yep. That's on my list.
Then it also increased the cost of the site, and you're already struggling with trying to make it somewhat affordable. And it's expensive, Chad.
Yeah.
It's super expensive. But that's why I say sell it separately. A guy can buy the budget version and deal with the misery of the initial setup. Because once a guy has it set up, in general, he didn't have, like Ryan Carter was like, the initial setup was a pain. Now that I've got it set up, it's a dream. And that's the truth. Guys have seen me do the setup, and they're like, man, that's kind of a pain. And then they see me do the sight in with different arrow profiles for different releases and different arrows, and they're like, dude, you were sighted in 5 minutes out to 80. From 0 to 80 yards in like 5 or 10 minutes, you're done with precision accuracy. And I'm like, yeah. And now I'm going to shoot this arrow with a lighted knock because it's legal here. And I'm going to set that one up, and I'm done in 5 minutes. And it's like, that right there is, guys don't get, like get rid of the range finding capability. I would use this site for every other reason. For me, even the range finding capability is icing on the cake at this point. For me, 99% of the reason I use it is for all the ease of setup, design, the light, the lighted reticle, being able to see it, knowing if I'm in the right anchor position at full draw, when I got gloves and coats and stuff on, am I shooting to the same spot? Like, all that stuff is, and different arrow profiles, different releases, being able to sight in for different weighted arrows and all that. Dude, Chad, that's a game changer.
Yeah, I'm taking notes.
So for me, that stuff is as important or more important than the fact that I can range when I'm at full draw. Like, that's a bonus, man. Because when I can go to fixed pins, I'm very confident 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, like I can shoot a fixed pin and shoot it and gap it. And I'm fine with that, especially when I'm elk hunting on an elk sized target or moose. It's like, that's no problem. Yeah. But it's the other abilities that are built into the sight that really are a dream, that really make it a pleasure to use.
Have you tried the electronic level yet?
Yes, I use it all the time.
So when we first were conceiving the site, it was no, we have to have a bubble level. If we leave that off there, we will taking it too far, and people will not. They'll be upset that we, didn't add that in there, and so came to market with the bubble level, and then we said we had full intention to be able to do that electronic level. So if you're listening, you don't know what that is, it'll put 3 pins at the bottom, and if you're not level, and you can set the threshold you want to be like 3 degrees or 2 degrees or 1 degree or even a half degree, which is almost impossible to hold your bow that still. But either the top or the bottom pin will blink if you're canted left or right. If you were to want to shoot, and you can do that in hunt mode and practice mode if you want. People are like, well, what happens if you get a pin that's really low down in the housing? Well, we'll move that stack of 3 pins for level check up to the top. So we keep it away from wherever your aiming pin is.
No, like I love that level because it's quick. And so here's my take on that, and we talked about this before. I think a design improvement for the sight would be a circular sight housing.
Yep.
If you had like Spot Hog does a great job of a circular sight housing. In fact, they have the wide rings, and so as you get more or less light in your peep sight, it's still very easy for you to line your peep sight up with your sight housing. When you're dealing with your sight with the Garmin Zero, it's not quite circular. It's got a little kind of oval-ish shape to it.
Well, it is a circle, but we cut the sides off, right?
Yeah, okay, which annoys the crap out of me. So, but
that's okay, man. This is what we want to hear, right? I need to know, and I'm probably get a bunch of messages after this of all the other things. Rudy didn't tell you this, but it's this, and this you got to fix too. So.
Well, and the sight bubble, it's right kind of out of my sight picture because it's kind of below the sight house. So I find myself peeking with my peeking down to see the sight bubble to make sure I'm level, and I'm going back and forth, peeking, checking, and moving back and forth. And so it's a bit of a problem, acquiring target and getting the shot off more quickly. So now with the level being the pins vertically stacked within the sight window, I don't need to peekaboo at the bubble anymore. When I'm at full draw, I just make sure the top and bottom are within the peep, and I do that naturally, like almost instantaneously. And now I no longer use the bubble. It's almost I don't even pay attention. I just know when it's not blinking. Like, it's all automatic now. When it's not blinking, I know I'm level.
Yep.
And if it's blinking left, like if the top's blinking or the bottom's blinking, I don't even know which way it needs to go, left or right, but my brain, my body does, because I practiced with it so much. I'd have to think about it. It's automatic, just like, a lot of things. So as soon as I come to full draw, when it's blinking, boop, it's righted instantly, and I can just shoot. There's no peekaboo and there's none of that. It's really efficient.
Yeah, what's interesting there is we have a guy here that he came to me one day and he said, "Hey, I know that I'm level, the sight, but every time I take a shot, the sight's telling me I'm 2 or 3 degrees off to the left or whatever." Mm-hmm. And we go and we put his sight on a bench, and we basically flat plates to that are we can tell if it's level or not, and the sight is reading that it is at 0 degrees. And then when we go put it on his bow, how he mounts it, it the bow could be not level and the sight's level, or the bow is level, which you want, right, for the most accurate shooting. But then when you mount the sight, you'd have to shim it to get it back to level. What we've done is we went ahead and added the feature in the level settings where you can tear your level. So you can level your bow, put the sight on there, get everything leveled up, and then if the sight's reading like a minus 2 or 3 degrees one way or the other, you can set that to 0 now that your bow is zeroed. And so
instead of shimming it and doing all that stuff, you can just electronically make that adjustment.
Right. And then if you're using the electronic level with the pins, like, you don't have to worry about it anymore. But then you could also, you just loosen the 2 little screws on the bubble and you move that to where it's correct. I mean, when you got a software-driven shooting system like this, there's a lot of cool stuff you can do.
Oh, absolutely.
But that's just, comes from listening to feedback and things like that. So
yeah, it's pretty sweet to see how far it's come too from the first version that I got into the one that I have now. I think it's pretty cool because you're taking a modern piece of equipment like a bow and Valkyrie arrows, X Impact Black Eagle, like the whole system set up, and you're adding a modern sight to go with it. It's almost comical the way that we use a modern rangefinder and we're like, yeah, everyone should use one. In fact, if you don't, you're sort of unethical, right? And there's that stigma attached, to the rangefinder is like as modern tech as you can get, electronic even, and then your bow and your modern bow, like mechanically how it's engineered is phenomenal. And so you have these modern devices and then you stick a ancient single pin or just a mechanical sight on there. And it feels like the sight doesn't belong with that modern piece of equipment. It's like taking a rifle and rather than putting a modern day scope on it, you're going to shoot iron sights. It's like, that doesn't really make sense to me. It's like you're using this modern piece of equipment and then you're using ancient sights. And I feel like that with compound bows. But people have a mental block when it comes to anything electronic. It's like, right, we can engineer the crap out of it if it's mechanical engineering. If it can shoot 350 feet per second and you have an arrow that can withstand so many pounds of impact and blow through bones, all of that engineering is okay because it's not electronic. But as soon as you say it's electric, we've gone overboard. Okay, we have now gone futuristic. Yeah. It's like, no, there's such thing as there's 2 types of engineering, mechanical and electronic, and they're both extreme feats, and there's just a stigma attached to anything electronic. I've just, it's the same with, but
you've never heard anybody get faulted for being too ethical, right? And that's,
well, here's the thing when it comes to ethics, and we had this discussion in Cole's tent in Kodiak, me and Adam Foss for quite a while. And I look at it like this. There's people, before we can have a conversation about ethics and stuff like that, morals, we kind of have to agree on what the terms mean. So for some people, especially if you're a diehard, fair chase, self-bow, traditional kind of guy, when you say, well, I just don't think it's ethical to kill with a rifle because it's not fair chase in their mind. It's not fair to the animal. Well, that's a form of ethics, right? That you're saying it's not fair. You want the animal to have the greatest chance of escape, and you feel that it's not ethical to use these advanced tools to do it. The animal should have a fairer chance. That's one form of ethics. But juxtaposed to that, or inversely related, is the concept of, well, you should be using a rifle and nothing else because it's the most accurate and lethal tool, which provides the quickest death. And it's like, okay, well, it's almost like, well, you have no right not to use a rangefinder and have precise accuracy because it's not ethical, and I've heard like Ranella talk about his dad, hunting with a bow, and his dad had a buddy who abhorred hunting with a bow because he saw it as a wounding machine, not a killing thing. And for him, it was totally unethical to use a bow and arrow because a rifle was an effective way of killing. And so you kind of have these 2 camps. It's like fair chase, efficient killing machine. And so which one are we talking about? Because as you make it more fair for the animal, You make it less effective at killing. And it's a simple discussion there, because if you take a trad bow and you were to put it in a hooter shooter with self-made arrows and everything, and that thing were to have no user input but just fire over and over again, that bow will not put that arrow in the same spot every time at 20 yards. It won't.
Right.
It won't. It has too many variables with it. It's not a precision built thing. It's like a slingshot. Let's go more primitive. You're not going to be able to repeat a slingshot. The David and Goliath swing it around, launch it is not going to be as repeatable as a compound bow in a hooter shooter or a let's say a rifle on a bench rest, right? Especially at greater yardages. The more primitive the gear, the less efficient it is at killing. But that's part of the game. That's why it gives the animal a greater chance of escape, too. And you have to get closer to be more accurate, because the variables at distance, with the more primitive the weapon, the variables at a distance get wider and wider and wider. And so if you take a shot with a trad bow at 15 yards, it's a whole new ball game when you take that same shot at 50 yards. But with a rifle, the distances get more and more extreme before you have that problem. You can put your crosshairs exactly on the animal at 100 yards, 50 yards, or 400 yards and hit virtually the same kill area with that type of weapon. It's like, which do you want? Efficient killing or fair chase? Not saying you can't have both, because this is going to piss a whole bunch of trad guys off. You can be efficient and kill animals with your bow and arrow just as well as a rifle. Okay. No, you can't. You can, if every guy was disciplined and every guy only took a 5-yard shot or 10-yard shot with their trad bow, then yes, I agree. You could be efficient. But even then, it's not the same as a 300 Win Mag going through an animal as an arrow that you built yourself. So say an atlatl. You're only going to be able to repeat the accuracy of an atlatl. It goes like this. Like Aaron Snyder's explained this quite well. When you draw a compound bow and you come to full draw, you have a draw stop. And when you hit that draw stop, it stops you from pulling too far or too short, right? Mm-hmm. You have a sight housing and a peep sight, which line up, which helps you remove parallax in the shot, in the aiming. You have things like a mechanical release instead of fingers that help you repeat the shot exactly perfect over and over again. You have all these catching features on a compound bow that help you repeat the same shot every single time. Anytime you remove a catching feature like that, the less repeatable that shot is going to be. Period. Human beings aren't perfect. And there's some guys that can do that and that are better at it than others. But regardless, it's not the same thing. You can't remove all those catching features and all those things that help you be more accurate and then say you're just as lethal. If that were the case, you'd have just as high harvest rates with a trad bow as you would a compound, and so on.
Well, we talked about this, right? To each their own. People, go for you've said this a lot of times, go have the experience that you want to have, right?
Yeah. And to caveat to undergird this whole discussion, when it comes to technology like the Garmin Zero, again, if it's going to reduce hunter opportunity, I am all for restricting it from archery only seasons. I am. I know it pains you to hear that, but it's but the fact is,
well, if there's no opportunity, then there's no hunters, and if there's no hunters, there's nobody using the site anyway, right? So it makes sense. I can't disagree with you there.
There's going to be parts of this country, like whitetail areas especially, where that's not so critical. Hunter opportunity is what it is. That won't shift, right? There's so many deer that need to be taken and so on. But for example, the crossbow. The crossbow has proven to me, based on major increases in harvest rates by crossbow use, that it doesn't belong in an archery only season. The crossbow needs to be in a crossbow season. If there are guys that want to shoot a crossbow, great. Put it in a different season where they have restricted opportunity. based on their success rates, right? It's like if I want to hunt elk with a rifle, look, my success rate's higher. They're going to restrict those tag allocations, right?
Right.
And
I mean, DNRs have a tough job, right? They have to use science and statistics to determine how to manage, and it's not cut and dry. The answer isn't laid out in front of you. You're making the best attempt that you can make.
But to allow a guy to use a crossbow in an archery only season, then it reduces all the hunter opportunity that used to be there by reducing the tags by 40% or 30%. I say it needs to go in its own season so that you don't upset the apple cart when it comes to hunter opportunity. I don't want to see it reduced any more than it already is, you know? So let's do our best to restrict technology as needed in, for instance, archery only hunts, or even in rifle hunts where you restrict that to some extent so that you can maximize hunter opportunity. But again, I don't believe the Garmin Zero is going to increase harvest rates at any significant level. It's not a magic bullet. You still have to be able to do all the things that it takes to kill an animal. And I think it does reduce animal suffering by giving you that pinpoint accuracy, you know, and I think it does reduce wound rates, which I said before will offset any increase in harvest rates. So for me, the jury's still out though. Maybe I'm totally wrong. I just don't think I am. I think I killed the animals I've killed this year effectively and efficiently with the Zero, and I would have probably killed those animals either way, just not as cleanly.
Yeah.
And so,
you know, I've gotten some letters from some guys that tested for us that, you know, had, you know, opportunity on elk that, you know, it was a stressful situation. They were able to get the shot off with Zero and, you know, were successful at the end of the day. But, you know, they say the sight helped, you know, it gave them an opportunity to range in an opening or to, you know, have the confidence that they knew the range when they finally got that elk stopped. But, you know, it's not everything. It's not even 90% of it.
That's what I was going to say is it's absolutely going to make a shot possible, an opportunity possible that wouldn't have been possible had they had to range and dial. And so I think in that case, you're going to get a harvest that you wouldn't have got if you didn't use a Zero. But then on the flip side, there's going to be times when a guy would normally have guessed a range and then had a marginal shot and never found the animal and then hunted again and killed another one, where the Zero is going to prevent that. And so I think it's going to be, in the end, you're going to have fewer instances of multiple animals wounded and lost basically in a season. And so I think in the end, it's probably going to be a wash, between those guys that get a shot off. And here's my other thing, Chad, is, you know, for a lot of guys that kill with a bow and arrow, they're just not leaving till they're successful. To be honest, I think that's a lot of archery success is time in the field, period. And so we can talk about this guy is so good and that guy is so good. Often what it is that guy was willing to spend 14 days in a row trying to kill, while this guy was willing to spend 3 weekends. It's like, or not willing, but capable because of job restrictions and family and whatnot. So, for example, a lot of these guys that, like this guy that makes a shot with a Zero, he probably would have missed that opportunity, but would have killed something else 3 days later without the Zero. And so, in my opinion, guys that kill, whether they have a Zero or they don't have a Zero, and guys that don't kill, they're still learning. They're still figuring it out. And the Zero is not going to be some magic bullet that all of a sudden makes them capable. It's just not. So that's why I'm not afraid of the technology, I guess. That's why I'm not against it. And I'm all about reducing animal suffering. So I just feel like it's something that we shouldn't be so like freaked out about. But for those that have the Zero or that are interested in more about it, you have made a bunch of updates to it. And, you know, what are some of the new features you're running right now?
So see, we talked about the electronic level. We talked about tearing the level. We also added what we call like moving your calibrated range stack. So today you have several profiles in your bow, and you have each one of those is essentially like a sight tape stored in your bow, but it's your sight tape that you created. And you probably got your 20-yard pin pretty high up in the housing because you're trying to max the distance. Let's say turkey season's coming up for me or you, and if you ever get back into turkeys, what you can do is you can move that whole stack up or down. Mm-hmm. So if you want a better sight picture for a turkey, you're probably not going to shoot 60 or 70 yards. So you can bring those pins down, so 20, 30, 40 or more centered in the housing, and then it will walk you through how you move your up or down on the rail and then readjust the reticle if you need to. But you don't lose all the pins. So those 70, 80, 90.
You basically maintain all your pin gaps.
Yep. And then after that season's over, you can move them back up. So if you were going to Arizona and let's say you weren't going to do Coues deer, but you're going to do all these other smaller game, you're not going to probably shoot at those extreme long ranges. You want a better sight picture. You don't need the range. You can move the stack up or down within the window, do a little bit of mechanical adjustment, and then you move it back when you're done. You don't have to go and reset all those pins.
That's pretty sweet because yeah, sometimes I want to maximize distance because I know I'm going to be shooting a long way on like a western mule deer type hunt, let's say. And so, yeah, my top pin's like 20 or whatever, and then all the way down to 100 on the bottom. But that makes the two extreme ranges a little harder to be accurate with because they're not in the center of the housing or closer to it. So yeah, this would be cool to be able to go, I want to move that stack so it maxes out at 60. And I want my 20, 30, 40 much lower in the housing. That would be handy.
Yep. But then 70, 80, 90 still exists within our table, and you can pull it back up when you're ready. And now you're ready to go with your elk setup. A really cool feature, that's cool, but we needed it, was a stalk mode. Mm-hmm. So guys started going elk hunting, they're carrying their bow and they're essentially riding the trigger the whole time, exhausting batteries, ranging when they don't intend to be ranging. So what we did is we put stock mode in there, and how it works is you power the sight down, and when it goes to power down, it will ask you a question: do you want to enter stock mode, yes or no? And if you say no, it just goes ahead and shuts off. If you say yes, it'll black the screen out and it will say, press any key on the housing to unlock it. So it locks your trigger, but any key on the top of the housing will unlock it really quickly.
That's pretty sweet, dude, because I find myself pushing the button all the time.
Well, what's cool about it too is it will leave it on the same. It leaves the sight on the page or the pin that you are on when you try to shut it down. So, for example, if you want to put it in that mode and you're afraid that you might go back to full draw and not remember just to tap any button to unlock it, you could turn your fixed pins on with the tap of the trigger button. Mm-hmm. And then you'd have to go in and set your timeout to be like 1 day. But I've already said, that the pins don't draw much current while they're on. So you set your pins not to time out, and then you put it in the stock mode. Now you're basically walking around with a fixed pin sight. And then as long as you remember to unlock it with the tap of the button, then you do your full draw range and shoot. If for whatever reason you got in a situation where you couldn't, you'd still have your fixed pins sitting there for you to use.
Gotcha.
So that was feedback from one of our testers in Arizona. And it's cool for, the support that we've gotten and people calling us say, hey, it would be cool if you can make it do this or that. And sometimes we can and sometimes we can't. So
I think you should add a self-esteem button.
Or solitaire.
Like you just push that button and the sight says, you are a great shot after every shot, or, something like that. Like, you are so handsome, I just feel like that would be a great addition.
That handsome feature wouldn't be on your site.
You'd have to go with rugged or gritty.
There's certain minimum requirements. But it wouldn't be on my site either. But yeah, so there's a lot of cool stuff. 3.20, it'll come out when this podcast comes out, and it's like I said, so every feature we could pack in and every fix that we've heard about that we needed to make, we put in there. So, but another feature that we brought in, it's not very many people would probably care to use it, but we had a guy that said, "Hey, I want to use this in archery 3D shoot." but range finding is not allowed. So I'm going to use it as fixed pins, or you can do the manual pin thing. So he put tape over the lenses of the rangefinder. But he said, hey, I want to know what my left or right was, like my cant on every shot, so I can go back and review later. So there's actually in that, I think it's both models, has this competition file in the shot dynamics, and you can turn it on or off. And if you turn it on, it will record your left or right cant for each shot. So if you go back later and you're like, oh, target 8, I missed it, you can go back and look and see, or is it because you weren't level or not. So pretty nichey, but again, it's one of those things somebody asked us to do, and we could do it, and it made sense, so we put it in there.
Yeah. No, that's cool.
There is a stats mode you can use. So
well, there is, okay.
It's different than practice mode, but kind of similar.
Okay.
But stats mode, it kind of looks like a spider web, but it's designed to look like segments of a target and accuracy. And if you use stats mode, you can go into that and you say, hey, I'm going to shoot 3 arrow groups, and here's the date that I'm shooting or whatever, because it doesn't have a clock in there, so you have to tell it so it knows how to timestamp the file. But you tell it how many arrows per group you want to shoot, and then it's essentially just range, get the pin that you want, shoot the 3 arrows or 4 arrows or whatever your group size is, and then at the end you can score that group. You can say I was this far left and this far down, and this is the total diameter of my group. And it can store all that information, and then you can go back and review that later, either on the site, or it writes a little CSV file in the mass storage, and you can go pull that off.
Gotcha.
Again, it's one of those things where if the guy's just super into it and wants to track that stuff, and if he's being honest with himself about how good his groups really are, he can see his improvement over time. So
yeah, that's a nerd thing. I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to lie. Too much work.
You're a stock mode kind of guy.
Yeah, totally. Let's talk about how it interfaces with the watch, because I've got the Phoenix, the big one.
You got the 5X Plus.
5X Plus. It's got maps and I track all my waypoints and all that kind of stuff. Quick question: can I download these waypoints to my Garmin Connect and interface it with my Rhino and stuff?
Well, to get to Rhino, it's a little bit trickier, but what you'd probably want to do now, just to get started, was we launched this app called Explore, and that is our waypoint tracks and routes management application.
Okay.
And so your Phoenix 5 series watch will pair with that app, and that will let you store all of that content within the app. You can also download maps, and it works offline.
Okay, so my tracks and all of that from my watch can go into
the Explore app.
And then from that app, can I get it into the Rhino?
To do that, to get them from Phoenix to Rhino, you need to use an application called Basecamp, which is you just go out to Garmin.com and put in Basecamp in the search. Yep. So you would connect your watch, you would copy all of your data off of there that you have, your waypoints, and then you would connect your Rhino, and then you would just drag and drop those onto the Rhino, and boom, now you got them. In the future, as we move towards, all our handhelds that we launch now and into the future will be compatible with that Explore app. And so that whole ecosystem will just work without you having to do any manual data manipulation. It'll all just be there.
Okay, so I can basically download the content from my watch to Basecamp, or do I have to go to Explorer first?
No, you would, for Basecamp, to go from watch to Rhino, you need to use Basecamp.
Okay.
If you just want to manage your waypoints, tracks, and routes solely from the Phoenix, and you're not going to use the Rhino for that anymore, then I highly recommend the Explore app, which will cloud sync all that stuff for you. It's cool, dude. It's legit.
Well, I'll get into that, but I definitely
wouldn't steer you wrong.
I want it in my Rhino.
Yeah, that's the only way to do it today.
Can I put it into my InReach, the waypoints at least?
There's always a way, but sometimes that way is a little bit confusing.
There's always a way, but you might need to be an expert in SQL and
no. Basecamp is really good for pulling off those types of files and just showing them to you and then moving them over to another device.
Okay, so let's say one of the things that irritates the crud out of me Like I use Onyx Maps for all my like private property boundaries, where I'm at, and I like having the GPS on my phone. Although the battery dies and the phone's not waterproof, and I have issues with that. But I can't share my tracks in Onyx with someone else.
Right.
I'm speechless. Like, that just seems so flawed to me.
Yes.
And so
it's something
we got dropped off in like Ohio, and they're like, okay, the tree stand is here. They've walked that route. They have the tracks. It's like 2 miles in or whatever, or like Janice is on his Quiet Cat bike riding back in there. All he can do is give you a waypoint, not the tracks.
Yeah.
And that didn't do a guy a lot of good when you're winding and there's like 15 offshoots of the same dirt road going different directions. And I mean, you can find yourself bushwhacking real quick, and that's no good. And I'm just like, I can't believe you can't share a track in Onyx Maps.
Yeah, I can't speak to their application, but our application that is on our roadmap for the near future is to be able to share. So when you record a track with your watch, you'd sync it to the Explore app. It's there. And our vision is that then you can share that track with somebody else's Explore app account. And then they'll have it, and they can either use their phone to navigate, or they sync that down then to their watch or whatever, and then they use their watch to navigate. So
is Explorer like a phone app?
Yes. Yeah, it's a iOS, and you can get it in the Google Play Store and the Apple Store.
Okay. Does it work like Onyx?
It does not currently have the property boundary content. We do make a product called HuntView Plus, which has all those property boundaries, and it has game management units. But it's a micro SD card that you would put into your Rhino or a GPS Map 66 or a product such as that.
Okay. Pretty good with the compass and a map nowadays. So, and in general, I don't really rely on my GPS like I did in years past. I like to have a few waypoints, but I'm pretty good at navigating in the backcountry now. And I don't find myself using especially in British Columbia or like Kodiak Island or whatnot. I really rely heavily on private property boundaries and use it for that, because when I'm in someplace like Colorado and we're in and out of private property boundaries, or even in Ohio, it's like you got to know where you're at, so you're with you're hunting where you're supposed to be hunting.
Yep, we're working to address that to where the ecosystem all works together between all of our current products and newer products going forward, and then all of the other different mapping options that we have. So it just it takes time to connect all those dots in the background.
So I mean, that was kind of a little tangent for me, but I use my watch often, more than any other GPS now, to record my tracks and my GPS location. Because once I charge this watch, unlike the Suunto or some other brands, like this thing will last 2 weeks in the backcountry using my GPS all the time. At the very least, it'll last a week with heavy GPS use, but usually I don't need to charge it for a couple of weeks, which is impressive compared to other ones I've seen. So that's handy, and I don't need to carry a giant GPS unit. I really haven't broke out the Rhino much. I've relied heavily on the InReach, and the InReach is a game changer, and it records waypoints as well. So between the InReach and my watch, I don't use my maps as heavily as I used to, but I do like the watch, and I feel like, having the maps, I have topo on there, and I can see, at a high level kind of where I'm at and where camp is at. And then I can see if I'm moving in the right direction as I'm returning just on my little tiny watch. So it's pretty handy. But one thing that the watch does that I haven't really mastered or played around with much is it interacts with the Xero site.
So we call that laser locate. And what that is when you have the A1i model, it keeps a record of your last 10 shots or your last 10 ranges. And then you can go, it's a little icon. It looks like kind of like an arrow sticking in the ground. And if you were to push the down button on your watch, you would get to, if your software is up to date. If not, you just go to Garmin Express and it'll load the latest software. A lot of our watches now do over-the-air updates where it'll download in the background through your connection with your phone.
Yeah.
And then when it's ready, it says, hey, I want to install myself. Is that okay? And you tell it yes or no. But anyway, you would flip through and you would get to this Xero widget. And the Xero widget will kick GPS on, and it will establish your position on the Earth. And that widget, unlike other widgets, doesn't time out. So it stays up, and it just sips GPS occasionally to make sure it's got a good fix on where you're at. And then if you go onto the site, you can basically send any of those last shots or ranges over to the watch. And as long as you're standing where you were when you took the shot or the range, that establishes your position now. And then the range, distance, and the compass heading and the angle establishes where that point was. And so then you can walk right to that spot. So for example, let's say you shot, something at 40 yards, you'd have a record of that from your tree stand. And then let's say you see it run into the woods a couple hundred yards away, or that may be a little bit past the range of the site that it can reach out to, but try to range the last place you saw it, it would store that range as well. You could then create those as waypoints if there's any confusion or doubt, and then you can go right to them. We did that because things look a lot different when you get on the ground than when you were up in the tree stand. And if there's no pass through, if there's no blood, right, you think you know where they were standing, but you're not 100% certain. And you think you know where they entered into the tree line, but, it helps with recovery. So
especially if it's really flat terrain of all grass, and then you see it go over a rise, to be able to range the last known spot the animal was at, especially if you have good visibility. Like, how far can you range with the Xero for that use?
So it's 100 yards to, I guess we would say, game targets, and 300 yards to reflective targets, which would be, reflective being like a white sheet of paper, which doesn't exist in the woods, right? But tree leaves and things are a little more reflective. It just, you're probably going to get somewhere between 100 and 200 max yards for dull targets like that. Yeah. But even if you can range a point between you and your tree stand or wherever you're standing when you took the shot and where you last saw it, those 2 points could help create a line to that, give you a bearing on which way to head. Well,
absolutely. Like if you shoot across a canyon, across a little draw or whatever, I've done this before, and you shoot and it's going to take 15 minutes to climb down and then up the other side to get to where, so the animal is relatively close, let's say 60 yards, but the only way to get to where the animal was is to go down a ravine and up the other side. It starts to get a little complicated at where was the animal standing exactly? And there's lots of things Aaron and I would do. Like I'd range from where I was at so I could range back to my original location where I shot when I got there, so I could verify that I was at that proper distance. Now I know I'm on the same elevation or distance. Now it's either left or right. But with the Xero, I can stand there and go, okay, it recorded where the arrow should have impacted at the range and the angle I was at. So now I can walk to where the animal was hit with accuracy. And then you're saying now I can also range it like at 100 yards as it went, into the tree line, can range that spot as well. So if there's no blood between the shot and where it entered the tree line, at least I'm getting to the tree line, and maybe, because a lot of times an animal will get hit and then it'll run and it won't bleed for 100 yards and then it'll start gushing. But finding that point where it really starts to bleed can be a challenge. And so that's a handy feature. I think I'd have to practice it to really make it really useful. It's sort of like the idea of, to me, a Bluetooth knock. A lot of guys are like, well, you use a Bluetooth knock and you're going to then lose the skills it takes to, pay attention to where the shot took place, pay attention to where the animal, like how you're, all these skills that are valuable to have. But in the case where those things fail you, it's nice to have like this kind of digital tool to help you in the recovery process. Because once an animal's hit, the most important thing now is to actually get it back, recover it.
It's a nice feature to have in the back pocket, right? If you're fortunate enough that you always see the animal go down in sight, or you've got a good trail that you can follow, blood trail, then great. But it's one of those things where we put it in there because there's been times where it's like, well, this would have been nice to have had, to have been able to mark these spots, and if you need to, back out, right?
Yeah.
Maybe you don't even want to start tracking at that point. You're going to leave, and once you come back 3 hours later, now everything is you're excited. Everything's a blur, right? What happened? There's some hard data that can help you get started.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. And you were just telling me a little bit earlier before we started that there's the watch I have it's like $700 or something.
Yeah, there's various price points for size and which band you pick and that type of thing. But yeah, we just launched. I think you're alluding to the Instinct.
Yeah. Which
is it's $299, but it basically has all the essential features that your watch has. It's just doesn't have. It's got a black and white display, and it doesn't do like Connect IQ and some other fancier things, but it has GPS, and it has GLONASS and Galileo and different satellite constellations and all that stuff at a much more affordable price point for some, and it also does the zero location thing like we just talked about.
Yeah.
So
that's pretty cool. So it's sort of a better price point, simplified model of what I've got, and it still has a lot of great features, but much more affordable. That's cool.
Smart notifications too, so when your buddy calls or wife texts or something, it'll buzz you on your wrist and tell you what's incoming. It was interesting. I listened to the entire podcast the last time we did it this morning, just so I could refresh myself on what I talked about, to try not to bore your listeners with something that I've already said. Hopefully I did that justice, but it really stuck in my head because at the end of it, you're like, yeah, if it's a piece of junk, I'm gonna throw it out. I'm excited that
no pressure, Chad.
No, not at all.
No,
but I'm so happy you've had so much success with it and become an essential piece of gear for you.
Anywhere it's legal, I plan to use it. I feel like it's just a pleasure to have. It makes archery hunting that much more fun for me.
Yeah.
When there's a lot of states where it's not legal, and I hunt in Montana, Idaho, and Colorado. In all those states, it's not legal to use, but there's quite a few states where it is legal, surprisingly. More states than not. Being able to use it, I should say, trying to set up a fixed pin sight to prepare for these states where it's not legal, I really got super irritated because I had to get my fixed pin sight, and then I had to go and set it up, and then I had to go and shoot, and I had to manually adjust my 30-yard pin, and then my 40, and then my 50, and move those all independently in this housing and shoot all these shots to try to get those exactly dialed. Once I did that, then I had to go and shoot a bunch of shots at 60 and 70 and so on with a sight tape. That was wrong. And then I had to go get another sight tape, adjust, and another sight tape. And each time I had to go get a sight tape and reconfirm it, it got me close. And 2 days later, million shots fired, I finally have, a sight set up. Now, heaven forbid, I want to shoot a lighted knock, or I want to maybe change the weight of my broadhead, or I want to shoot a different release or whatever. Now I got to change the whole damn setup. And I'm like, I felt like I just went back into Stone Age. I thoroughly irritated, and I felt constrained, extremely constrained, because now I can't dynamically change on the fly. When I went to Ohio, it was legal to use a lighted knock. I didn't have time for my last hunt to mess around with getting sighted in. That's okay. I landed, which I like to do anyway. I landed in Ohio. I set up a target, and you never know during travel if your sight gets bumped or things get off or your bow's out of tune. Walked out there, pulled out my lighted knock arrows, which weigh quite a bit more on the back end than my other arrows, and they're not the same grains. Just set up a new profile for it, and in 20 or 30 minutes, I was sighted out to 80 yards, and very confident in my setup, and knowing that even after my flight, even after everything else, even after switching arrows and shooting a different arrow, that everything's dialed. And I know that at 60, I'm exactly hitting 60. That right there to me is pretty powerful. Normally, if I landed with a sight tape, and I wanted to change lighted nocks, just out of the question. It's out of the question. I can't change my setup then. And then if it gets bumped or knocked, I got to manually adjust 3 pins, but the rest, the sliding thing, I'd have to like make mental notes or try to rip the tape off and put a different tape on because something switched on me. It's just, it's like an archaic system compared to what we have today. And so, the range finding aside, the site is genius in all those other categories. So I'm excited to see what you guys come out with next, like a titanium rail or a sliding sight or something steps it up to another level. But in the meantime, I've got 2 Zeros mounted on 2 bows, and the only time they come off is when I go to a state where I can't use it.
That makes me happy to hear.
I was much less reluctant to endorse it when I first started using it. I was like, jury's out, but now I've tried it and I've tested it and I'm impressed, man.
You remember Emily Cantner?
Yeah.
Sent her a text before I was waiting for you to come on to say, hey, I'm talking with Gritty today. Do you mind, what are your thoughts on the site? Can I share them? And she said, oh yeah, I still love it. I was like, well, I didn't want to say that you still loved it without asking you first, but yeah, and then Lucas down there that was in Texas, he posted a nice video on Archery Talk about it, which goes through, his overall impressions after shooting it for a while. And Morgan, he's gone on to, I think he's on Meat Eater now as part of their staff. And I don't know if he's in a lot of states where he gets to use it, but, I think he still does when he can. So I know you guys were skeptical, but we made believers out of you. So. Yeah, it's been fun. It's a great addition, I think, to archery. And I think it'll be a lot of fun for new hunters, especially, to come on board and play around with it. You still got to do all the things you got to do in archery, but it does, I think, reduce the number of times where a guy has just on the whim guesses because he doesn't have time to range. You see that in Land of the Free. You see these guys that come to full draw. They know the range, but the elk doesn't play by the script, and it's moved and moved and moved, and it's like, okay, you either let down and range again, and that animal is gone, or you make an educated guess on range and you shoot. Most of the time, you're not letting down. You're going to make an educated guess and take that shot. And sometimes it's going to pay off and sometimes it's not. And we can talk about the morality of that or the ethics, but at the end of the day, with a Zero, to tap an exact yardage pin and a dead bull versus a shot that's getting taken anyway and a bull getting wounded and lost. It's hard to let down once you're at full draw, man. I fall prey. It's hard to let down. It's like, we all know who've been there. You don't have that luxury. Yeah, the nerves are going to start kicking in, something like that too. If it's happening fast, like there's panic that's going on, right? And you're going to rush. And there's some instances where you have more time than you think you have, but your brain is telling you now. And maybe, but how many, and you could be right. And I think like David Brinker, I respect the hell out of David. He's like, I'm letting down. And if I miss the shot opportunity, I miss it because I don't want to wound something. I try to be that way as well. On that Elk 101 series that Corey Jacobson just finished, people can watch it. I probably should have let down. I was at full draw for probably 2 minutes. Too long at full draw. But it was like a 35-yard shot or something. There's a little bit of brush. I didn't execute a great shot. And I've learned with archery, sometimes you're an all-star and you do everything perfect. And Big Sexy dies in, 4 seconds. There are times where it's like, bam, you're the guy. And then there's times where you're humbled. Like Corey missed and they tracked, and I think it's the first year in some 20-something years he hasn't killed an elk, and he wounded one and they never found it. And the best of the best miss. It's just life. But if you can avoid that because you're using something like the Zero, I just think it's a good move. It's a good move for wildlife. And like I said, it's not like most guys are letting down, and most of those shots are an elevation issue. It's yardage. Yeah. They're all good shots. It's really an elevation. Did you have the proper yardage? And man, with that Zero, you can really tighten up those shots and recover animals better than you do when it's marginal and now you got to track it for 9 miles. Which you can track on your watch. But that's not what we want. So. Yeah. Which I did.
in fact, on my watch. That bull wallowed in a mud hole and clotted up his wound, and we still found it like 300 yards later where he bedded, but he stood up and left from there. And I don't know if the shot was fatal or not. It's hard to tell. I honestly, I don't think so. I think he moved around. Like, he didn't act wounded or injured. You get a muscle hit, and as long as they keep moving, they can bleed for a while. But once it clots,
yeah,
they're done. And here's the thing that's the most discouraging about when you wound an animal. Often you'll see a guy go, "Man, I'm relieved. It was a clean miss. I completely missed." And I have mixed feelings about that, because on one sense you're glad because you didn't wound the animal, and everybody wants to make sure. I mean, I want to do right by the animals I'm hunting and respect them, and that means making good shots. The flip side to that is you missed an entire 4x8 size target, or let's say 3x6 or whatever, like an elk target is. You missed the whole thing, Chad. Like, you didn't you got to be pretty bad to miss a target that large. So it's like a mixed bag. It's like if you miss them, but you wound them, at least you're like in the ballpark. You miss them completely. Yeah. It's like, should you be hunting? But I feel very confident with the Xero and single pin accuracy, in a way that I feel really good about the shots I take being efficient and lethal. Because ultimately, it's not, you want that clean, efficient kill, and I'm excited to test it some more, use it in Arizona. It seems like the perfect for whitetail hunting out of a tree stand, and for hunting in Arizona coos, javelina, jackrabbits. I feel like, man, what a fun hunt that'll be with a Xero at my disposal. Something like this coos deer or a whitetail, where I feel like they're rutting, they're chasing does, and it's like they could be anywhere between 16, 15 yards from you and 50 yards from you. And it's like, when they stop and you're already at full draw, to be able to have that single pin is pretty legit. So I'm excited.
Be interesting to see what Randy thinks of it. So I've not met him before, but see if he thinks it's...
Oh, Newberg? Yeah, it'll be interesting. We'll have that discussion. I'm sure it comes up. Everybody, though, that gets their hands on it and actually messes around with it, they're usually pretty intrigued by it, because it is a great piece of engineering. It's pretty impressive. So
yeah. Well, thanks again.
Yeah, man.
We appreciate you.
Thank you. Keep on engineering, or whatever you guys do down there at Garmin, making new neat stuff.
You'll hear from us again. We have more cool stuff coming in the Xero category. Some of it may be up your alley, some of it may not be. But
like a new titanium rail anytime soon?
Man, it's on my list. I wrote it down. I can't make any promises.
Micro adjustment dials and the whole,
I've heard you loud and clear.
So. Thanks for everything, Chad. We'll catch you later.
Yep.
Stay gritty, my friend.
See you, Brian. Thank you.